Okay, good morning again. Let's hear a little more excitement. You know, there's an old saying, it's never too late to learn, but sometimes it can be too early. And I know it's mid-morning for some of you, but some of you may be a little tired, a little grumpy, a little sleepy, just sort of getting up. And for those of you here who have that, I heard this prayer the other day that's for you, and it was like this: Dear God, so far today I've done all right. I haven't gossiped and I haven't lost my temper. I haven't been nasty, grumpy, or selfish. However, in a few minutes, God, I'm going to get out of bed, and that's going to need a lot of help. Amen. So hopefully you're wide awake and ready to go, because in the short time that I have with you, like Bob said, what I want to do is really share with you some tips, tools, and solutions to build rapport, relationships, and connect with both customers and coworkers. And the reason I bring this up, the bottom line of why we're doing this, is because 90% of all the companies I've worked with over the 20 years or so I've been doing this, 90% of the problems result from communication breakdown. So I'm going to try to get into that a little bit today. But to get us into the right frame of mind today, what I'd like to do, just by starting off, is to ask you a question. And the question is, how many of you would be happy, just by a show of hands, if everything went right? Quality of service, reliability, you know, raising your hand already. No, not yet. No. How many would be happy if everything went right? Quality, reliability, responsiveness, how you get along with your customers and coworkers. How many would be happy if everything went right about 90% of the time? Just by a show of hands, how many would be happy with 90%? How many would be happy if everything went right 95? How about 97? You know, there's some companies that literally have a 99% success rate, 99.9% success rate. For example, Federal Express, 99.9% on-time delivery. Motorola has even a better success rate than that. So assume everybody here be happy if everything went right 99.9% of the time, pretty much? Well, if you're happy with 1/10 of 1%, what I want to do is share with you some statistics. And the first one up here is with 1/10 of 1% off, these are some of the things that would happen. First of all, 12 babies would be given to the wrong parents daily if you're only with 99.9. And it's interesting. When I first heard this statistic, I was in a session with, like you guys were here, and it was right before lunch, and you know how you're just sitting there saying, okay, when's this over? I just want to keep moving on. And then I started thinking about this a little bit. And let me ask you this. How many of you, because it got me thinking, how many of you have kids in here that don't look like you at all? Anybody? And then I started wondering about this, because I actually have a 19-year-old, and Bob's seen him before. He's actually tall and good-looking, and I'm actually the opposite, so I'm wondering where the heck he came from. But so you start to doing this. And by the way, you know, it's sort of, I'm making this sort of fun about this, but anybody familiar, see that thing in the news just a while ago where there was a kid who was 22 years old in Southwest Virginia, and he was actually what was it? He was actually raised by a different family. Isn't that amazing? So he was actually switched at birth. So these things do happen. Also, with 1/10 of 1% off, 18,322 pieces of mail would be mishandled per hour. 2 million documents will be lost by the IRS this year, and you probably hope that will happen. 291 pacemaker operations will perform wrong, and the list goes on and on and on. And the point I'm trying to make is, would you still be satisfied? Would your customers be satisfied? Would your coworkers be satisfied? Would your members be satisfied? Because really, good is not good enough. You know, expectations are getting higher, the bar is being raised, and let's just put it bluntly, your associates, your managers, your coworkers, your members are judging you by the experiences they have elsewhere. So for example, they're comparing you to the Southwest Airlines and the Disney Worlds on those types of experiences. And to put this in perspective a little bit too, one of the things, to give an example of this, I travel quite frequently, and actually I think my next frequent flyer award is a plane, believe it or not, but I travel quite a bit, and one of the things that happens is I stay at a lot of hotels, and I'm sure a lot of you I know travel quite a bit. And you know, sometimes you, like Chris, you'll order room service in the morning because you have an early session, and what happens, you order room service at 6 and it comes what, at 5 of or 5 after, but who really cares? But then you go to a place like Marriott's. When I go to Marriott's, I started going to Marriott's for a while, and when you order room service at a Marriott at 6 a.m., guess when it comes? It comes right at 6 a.m. So then I don't just get upset at hotels doing that, but I get upset at, not you, Gil, necessarily, but you and you and you and you when you're late for a meeting. So people are judging you by their experiences elsewhere. So you really got to be aware of this type of thing that we're going. So you're really, as I said, competing, and you're compared to all these other areas. And there's a term which I'm sure a lot of you have heard before called moments of truth. Everybody's heard of that before? And this is really important when you want to build rapport and relationships and connections, whether you're on the phone, whether you're online or in person, is the fact that every time you have a meeting, transaction, or interaction with anyone, an impression is formed. So as soon as you walk in that door, people are making up their minds about you. And by the way, did anybody see the Wall Street Journal a while ago, how long it takes for people to make up their mind about you? What do you think that is? Anybody? 10 seconds is way too long. not 3, 1. It's actually milliseconds. People make up their mind about you by the way you look or the way you come across. You're not smiling, you're doing this. And then they judge you immediately like that, and then you got to talk your way out of it. For example, how many of you ever seen that show, Britain's Got Talent? Anybody remember that woman, Susan Boyle, who was the singer? And did anybody see that? How many of you saw that, by the way? And she's in the audience, and she's about to do her show, and it's like an American Idol type setup, but she's just sitting there, and she's about to get up, and Simon Cowell and some of these guys are like, oh God, who does she think she is? It wasn't Simon Cowell, it was somebody else, but who do you think she is? And then she actually gets up, and she's great, but she didn't look like the singer, the type of thing. So what are they doing? People, again, as I said, are moving their judgments about you. And by the way, you do not have to do much to look good anymore. Let me just put it that way. So when I say that, just to give you an example of this, how many of you ever returned a phone call and somebody said, geez, thanks for calling me back? How many of you got that? So some of you can relate to that one. And that's not big, great customer service, is it? But so many people don't do it that you start looking good because you actually return the call. Good example of this, a couple years ago, somebody was looking for a speaker for one of their meetings. And by the way, just to point out, they were not looking for me. I just want to make that clear right off the bat. But they called me up and they said, we're having a meeting in 3 months and we're looking for a speaker for our meeting. And guess what they said on the phone? They said, we have 2 other speakers we've used in the past. They're fantastic. They're great. They're the best you've ever seen. You know, we're going to stick with them, and we're going to have one of them do this thing. However, because of our rules, and I couldn't believe they were this honest, we have to look at 3 vendors. Has anybody ever had a rule like that? You have to look at 3 people to make it look what? Fair. So they said, we have to look at 3 vendors. And they said, would you mind being on the list? And you know what they said right after that? And by the way, I just want to let you know this. Obviously, we're not going to use you. And I said, oh, well, thanks for sharing that information. And I said, fine, put me on your list. I don't care. So they put me on their list, and 3 weeks later, I got a call from them. And and guess what they said on the phone? They said, you know what, we want to hire you. And it was sort of unbelievable, and I couldn't believe what I said next, by the way, because I said, well, here's what and Bob would never approve of this as a sales technique, but I said, well, what happened to the people you really liked? Don't ever use that, right? I said, what happened to, I somehow just burst out of my mind, what happened to the people you really liked? And you know what they said? They said that the thing is, they never what? They never returned the phone call. And you know what the moral of the story was? They didn't even like me, and they hired me. So the point was, you can get away with murder. But we're not here today to talk about normal things you can do. We're here to talk about how do you make yourself stand out? How do you make yourself more memorable? Because an example of that, how many of you, for example, can remember something that happened 10 years ago really clearly, but if I asked you what happened yesterday, you can't remember? Anybody know what I'm talking about? You can remember something that happened about 10 years ago? For example, I said I have a 19-year-old son, and I can remember something that happened like 15 years ago when he was 5 years old. I was getting on a flight, and by the way, for some of you who fly, none of these flights are memorable unless they do something that stands out. But I was getting on this flight, and what do we say? Good is not good enough. Everything was just okay, so I didn't remember it. But I'm getting on the flight. My son's 5 years old, and I can remember everything about that flight like it was yesterday. I can remember the pilot's name. I can remember the flight attendants. I can see it like I was there yesterday. And the reason I say this is because when I walked on, the pilot takes my little son like this, and by the collar, and he says, hey, Sonny, how would you like to fly this plane? And he brings him up into the cockpit. You ever seen a 5-year-old in a cockpit, and he's playing with the wheel? And I said, don't touch any buttons. You know, I was getting a little nervous that the whole plane's going to take off. And because of that, I can remember the pilot. I can remember everything about it. I can remember the passengers scared to death that he was going to fly. All these things just come to clarity. And what we want to really talk about today, what are you doing every day to make every meeting positive, memorable, and special? So if you can remember that acronym, PMS. Everybody got that? PMS, positive, memorable, and special. By the way, if you come away today and you say I didn't learn anything, now you know, because I never knew what that meant. So now we got it, right? So we're all clear on what that does. And by the way, one thing too, because I'm here just for a short time, but what I would recommend, sort of as a light bulb moment, is every day sometimes look at what can we do. Get your staff together and say, what can we do to make every meeting, transaction, interaction positive, memorable, and special, and have some meetings on that too. Now, going on with all this stuff, the problem is we can't become complacent. Did anybody ever here read the book Good to Great? How many of you ever read? Anybody read the book Good to Great? And in there, the first thing he says, this is a book by Jim Collins, which I would really highly recommend, but in the first chapter he says, good is the enemy of great. Good is the enemy of great. And the problem is we come to sessions like this, and this is not rocket science stuff I'm talking about, but the problem is we think we're all good, right? We're good is the enemy of great, which means we're all good enough. Everybody in this room is good, but the problem is we don't take it to the next level because we're doing all right. You know, a good example of this, when I was doing these slides up a while ago for something I was working with Chrysler, I was working with Bob and Gil here. And they took a look at my initial slides I had, and they said, you know, these aren't the best. And actually, it was pretty worse than that. They said, these are terrible. But anyway, I'm trying to be nice here. But they said, these weren't too good. And my first reaction is what? What happens when somebody tells you that? You say, well, you know what? I'm doing lots of speeches. I'm getting a lot of bookings. I'm speaking all over the place. And, I don't really, that's fine. But it wasn't really, I thought, affecting me. And what happens is because what? Our ego gets in the way, or our pride gets in the way, that we don't what? Change, because we're what? Good enough. But then I started using some of the things that Gil spent some time with me, and he worked on some of these things, and it actually turned out a lot better. And by the way, if you don't like the slides, you can blame Gil here for all that. So if none of these is good, blame Gil. There you go. He's the man to take a look at. If you really still don't think they look good, then Gil will take responsibility. So we'll go from there. But the question again is, the book states, do you want to be at the station or do you want to be moving ahead? And that's why we need to keep constantly reviewing this stuff that we're talking about. Some of the things I'm going to talk about today, you'll know. Some of the things you won't. But it's not that you know these things, it's that you're doing them. And by the way, I'm not as much as a teacher here as a reminder and a reinforcer of this stuff that we've just got to know. For example, to show you how we really got to take a good look at ourselves, it's, as I said, not knowing this stuff, but doing it on a consistent basis is, there was a study done by the University of North Carolina a while ago. And they asked 1,601 people. They asked them this question, and by the way, there were car dealers in this and a lot of different groups, but they asked them, is there incivility in the workplace? Is there rudeness? Is there backstabbing? Is there poor cooperation? Is there not getting along? Is there poor teamwork? Is there friction? Is there poor customer relations? Of 1,601 people, and when they asked that question, guess what 89% on a nationwide study said? 89% said yes. But when they asked those same people, are you ever rude? Do you ever backstab? Do you ever have poor customer service? Guess what 99% of the same people said? No, I don't do it. So the question is, who's doing all this stuff that we want to really know about on that area? And the problem is we don't see ourselves, because I do want you to take a good look at yourself today. How many of you ever have gone into a good example, this happened a few months ago. How many of you ever gone into an elevator and you don't look at anybody in the elevator? Is anybody like that, or is I'm the only person in here who does that? You know, it's you sort of look at the ground, or you look at the ceiling, or you look over there. Well, I was in this elevator a while ago, and just picture this. I walk in. I'm going from floor 2 to 17, and here's the door. I'd walk in. My mind was on something else, and I'm just facing the door like this, and all of a sudden I start going. I started coughing really loud. I did not have my hand over my mouth. And all of a sudden, a woman, I didn't even know she was in there, screamed, and she says, "My mother taught me. When you cough, you put your hand over your mouth." So immediately, what's your first reaction? Is to do what? Is to, like, but I wrote this book called Get Along, so I can't do that. So I said, I'm ready to do it, but you know what? What did chapter 3 say? Do not hit people. So I couldn't do that. So I listened to my book, but what I did is, we're traveling up, and I turn around, and I look her right in the eye, and I said, you know what, I was calm. I really appreciate what you told me. Because, however, I don't want to give people coughs like this, and I want to thank you for sharing that with me, so I don't, give people diseases and coughs and all that. And you know what she did? She calmed down herself, and she said to me, she said, you know what, you are so nice. But guess what she said next? She said, when I tell people what I just told you in the nice way that I told you, they start yelling and screaming at me. And then you know what she asked me? She says, what's their problem? Now I didn't have time to pull out my slides because I was going to show her what her problem was. But in her mind, she thought she was talking to me in a what? In a nice way. And one of the things I also do besides the speaking, I actually get involved in some organizational development with companies and organizations. And sometimes people get into mediation fights with each other. And I always ask them, I'll say, well, how did you talk to that person? They said, well, I said, let me hear what you really said, because a lot of times that can get in the way of how things work in that area. So again, focus on yourself, because the only person in this room you can change is who? Yourself. And if you don't believe me, has anybody here ever tried to change your husband? Or your wife, your boyfriend, or your girlfriend? Anybody ever tried that? And you know, after your 9th divorce, you're wondering why that's still not working. So you've got to keep working on these things as you do. By the way, I am going to move relatively quickly because did anybody see this in the Wall Street Journal a while ago? The average attention span of an adult is what? 12 minutes. That's way too long. Okay, keep going. Anybody seen that article? 3 minutes is way too long. Dude, he said, what did you say again? Like, who are you? I don't know. Let me explain who I am again. Yeah. Anybody see that? It took too long to read it. That's a good one. Nobody saw that? Anybody want to take another guess? 1 minute's way too long. 30 seconds is too long. 3 seconds. Okay, we're getting close now. They said the average attention span of an adult was 8 seconds, which means people will actually listen to you longer, but you better have something they want to say. You better keep it moving. You better be enthusiastic and all that type of stuff. And by the way, for those of you who do training and presentations too, the most important thing you can be is enthusiastic. People are more convinced by your energy, enthusiasm, and conviction than by anything else you do. It's like all those politicians who are all convicted, not convicted, but have a lot of conviction. And you know, you follow them and then you find out they're telling you something different, but you go into that area anyway. So that's what we're going to do. And I do want to say this too, no matter why you're here, because there's 3 types of people sitting here. They're visitors, prisoners. I don't mean to look at you particularly, but I know they made you come, or people that really want to be here. The information I'm going to talk about will help you with this job, will help you with any job. And also, here's a benefit for that. It'll help you in your personal life too, because there's a lot of stuff that goes into that area. Okay. And as I said before, I just want to repeat this again of why the bottom line of this whole thing, of why we're doing this, is because 90%, what do we say? 90% of all problems are related to some kind of communication breakdown. And the people that communicate well, get along, are likable, trustworthy, connect, get cooperation, tend to get along and be more successful in life. And to put this into perspective a little bit more on the likability part of it, how many of you have ever seen that show, Think You Can Dance? Anybody ever think You Can Dance? And there's a guy named Nigel in there who's one of the judges, and he's pretty ornery. And he said this. He said, it's not necessarily the best dancers who win, it's the ones they like the most. And think about that sometimes. How many times have you not dealt with somebody because you didn't like them? And maybe they had a better product or better price or better something in that area. By the way, this is where I get all my material from Think You Can Dance. So all you guys go to the deep stuff. I get it on TV. But anyway. The other thing is Teddy Roosevelt said, too, the #1 most important single ingredient for success is knowing how to get along and connect with people. So it really goes into that area. And it's interesting, too. This was just on the news the other day. CNN interviewed some recruiters, professional recruiters, people that hire people for jobs. And it was interesting when they said, what do they look for when hiring people? And this sort of got me by my attention. And they all said this: it's not their background, it's not their experience, it's not their qualifications, but how they present themselves and connect with the audience. And you hear this over and over and over again in those areas. So the bottom line, you know, by the way, we're all being judged and observed all the time. Everyone in this room, your body language, your tone, how you come across, and no matter what you do. And the bottom line is, everything being equal, people are going to what? They're obviously going to deal with people they like and they trust. But here's the other line you want to look at. Everything being unequal, they still deal with people they like and trust. For example, how many of you ever walked out of a negotiation to buy a car because you didn't like the salesperson? Anybody ever done that? You know, might have the better price, better this, but you just didn't like their attitude. Or how many won't cooperate with somebody at work? Nobody wants to raise their hand on that one. And do you want to give an example? This is very interactive. You can point out who it is. But anyway, or how many of you ever didn't go to a higher price vendor or supplier because you just didn't like them? Sometimes like that. And I've seen some people in that area too. So the thing is, you've got to take a good look at that. And a good example of this, and this hit home for me about 20 years ago. How many of you have ever heard of a company called SkillPath? It's a seminar training company. There's Career Track, SkillPath. There are all these seminars. And what they do is they get people like myself, and they book us to speak at different meetings all around the country. And about 20 years ago, I was considered to be one of their speakers, an instructor for this seminar training company called SkillPath. And it was in Shawnee Mission, Kansas. I don't know if anybody's been to Shawnee Mission, but they flew me out. They paid for me to go out there and fly out. And then they were going to have a group of like 6 people there, and I had to give like a 20-minute presentation to see if I was any good and met with their qualifications. But here's the catch. It was interesting because when I walked into their office, the first thing that happened, I walked in and everybody like was really really nice. You ever been to a place where everybody's like really nice? It's like a cult. It scares you a little bit. You know, coming from DC, you sort of get scared. Why are they so nice? So I felt like I was going to get in trouble on that one. But anyway, they were so nice. And then I was about to go up the room to give my presentation to see if I was any good. And the woman in charge, the CEO of the company, Denise Dudley, comes up to me like this. And she gets right in my face, by the way. This is before I started. And she says, you know, Arnold, I only deal with people I really like. So immediately I'm thinking, oh man, now I got to take the bus home from Kansas. No round trip airfare. You know, this isn't looking good. And then she went further to the point, and she says, and listen what she said next. She says, I would rather have a solid B speaker, a good speaker, a B speaker, who connects with the audience, gets along, is likable, approachable, and versus a great speaker who's arrogant, condescending, thinks they know it all, and the audience is idiots, types of things. And she says, and guess what she said too? I always get better reviews from the B speakers than I get from those A+ who don't stand too long with us. So, you know, it sort of hits home a little bit too. It doesn't mean to be a bad speaker. I don't want to say that. But how people, what do we say? The connections and all that stuff does make a difference. So what we really want to talk about today is that the soft skills that we're going to discuss actually produce the hard results. A lot of people think what this stuff is this touchy-feely things. I just got to do it, give them the information. But you've got to go beyond that. And to put this into perspective too, I always like to look at companies who are doing things like this and to benchmark other companies. For example, anybody ever flown Southwest Airlines? And the reason I like to use Southwest Airlines is they're the only only airline in the United States for 37 years that's been profitable. So we like to, so what are they doing right? And how many of you ever read Fortune magazine of the best 100 companies to work for? Anybody ever seen that? And they're usually 5, 6, 7. I think NADA was #1 this year, wasn't it? Best company to work for in the United States. So maybe I better move on. Let me move on from there. But Southwest Airlines, and I got this quote when I did some work a long time ago for them, and he said this, which is something to remember. He said, our productivity is the result of the trust we have with each other. If you have the right trust, working relationship environment, and positive communication, the work gets done and the customer keeps coming back. So all these things got to constantly be worked on. And to take it a next step further, there's a study done by Harvard and Stanford University a while ago that said that only 15% of your success in life will be due to your technical skills, and 85% will be your social, your communication, your ability to get along, your emotional intelligence. Now, by the way, do not read this the wrong way. A lot of people read this and say, you mean I just can be nice and be an idiot at work? No, you can't. You got to be competent at what you do, else you won't have a job. But if you want to get cooperation and build rapport and get people to get along, you've got to work on that other aspect of it. And by the way, if you don't believe me, is anybody familiar a number of years ago with that Coast Guard captain that committed suicide? Anybody know what I'm talking about? There was a Coast Guard captain. He was technically great. He was brilliant. He had all the awards, all the things. But one day he went to a staff meeting like this and he said a few off-color words and offended some of the people there. And guess what? They filed grievances against him and took it to that point. And he actually, took it a little deep, committed suicide on that. Or is anybody a NASCAR fan in here? Anybody NASCAR fan or familiar with NASCAR? Dale Earnhardt Jr.? Anybody familiar with him? And Dale, this was I think it was about a year ago. He was like #1 in the ratings or something, and he said, did anybody remember that? He said like an off-color word, and they took 15 points off his score, and he went to #2. So again, technically he was the best, but guess what? He got messed up by his actions. Or did anybody remember the cashier in the Senate office building? There was a cashier, and she kept saying, thanks, babe, thanks, hun, thanks, babe, thanks, hun. And a guy said, I'm offended she's calling me hun. And guess what? She lost her job over that. And I know what a lot of you are saying, get a life, don't worry about it, but I hate to say it, you really need to watch yourself and be politically correct on these types of areas. Now, another thing, too, we get into is when we talk about this, is we get into making judgments about people and stereotypes people. As I was saying about Susan Boyle, situation. Or I still hear from a lot of car dealers or people who deal with car dealers a lot of times too, that they still pay attention to the man. Anybody know what I'm talking about? They don't pay attention to the woman there. If there's a man and a woman, a lot of times they don't pay it. And this should be all known, and we should know this by now, but they're still not paying attention maybe sometimes to the woman there, and we get into trouble because what we do, we make what? Instant judgments. And to make my point about that, let me ask you a quick question. Give me some of the negative or aggravating behaviors of men. When you think of men, what are some of the negative or aggravating behaviors of men? Can't think of any? Yeah. Anybody? Pardon? Somebody give me something. Won't ask directions. Okay, men won't ask directions. What else?
Always have the right answer.
Always right answer. What else? Don't listen. What'd you say? No, don't listen. Don't listen. Other negative or aggravating behaviors of men that you can think of. Stubborn. Men are stubborn. What else? Toilet seat up. Okay. Anything else? Is that it for men? Some more. Anybody think of anybody? Yeah. Short-term memory. Okay. I haven't heard that one for a while. Short-term memory.
Like the last word. Like the last word.
Like?
They like to have the last word.
Oh, like to have the last word. Last word. Okay. By the way, one thing about short-term memory, I'll just mention, there is actually a physical thing with that. Did anybody see that? Where women actually have a, I don't know what part of the brain it is, but it's bigger in the hip, is it the not hippopotamus, but the hippopotamus, and that's why a lot of women will remember every detail of everything you've done forever. You know, so there is something to that. And men don't have that, so men forget the thing the next day. But do I? Anything else? Okay. Pardon? They won't share the remote. Okay, don't share remote. Okay, I think we got enough for men. Let me do the flip side of this. Give me some of the negative or aggravating behaviors of women. I heard somebody say toilet seat down. Okay, that's one. What else? Nag you. Okay, nagging.
Can we copy and paste some of this stuff on the USB?
Yeah, right. Anything else? Over-explain. Women over-explain, okay? Hold a grudge. In the passenger seat. What's the passenger seat? Drive from the passenger seat. Anything else? That's it? Remember everything. Never forgets, right? Somebody just said shops too much. It was on special. Okay. It's on sale. Well, anyway, moving on from that, because I think we don't have probably all day for that stuff. But anybody have an idea why, in reference to this, why I even went over this? I didn't think so. Okay. Well, let me tell you what the point of what I was trying to get at this a little bit is that people, whether it's true or not about this thing, and I use men or women, but we could use black or white, we could use religions, we could use all sorts of things. People have perceptions about people one way or the other, and then you know what we do? Our body language, our tone, we start treating people that way because of those actions that we feel. A good example of this too, this was actually a dealership where there was a woman in charge. I won't mention any names, but here she is. She's sitting up here, and there's two men who work for her, and a supplier comes in to try to sell something, and the supplier was a good speaker, he was smooth, he was all this, and when he comes in to sell to this sell to this dealership, here's the woman in charge, here's the two guys who work for her. Who was he looking at the whole time? The men. He never looked at the woman in charge because some stereotype or comes from his background. He was thinking that way. And I heard what happened later because she says, you know what, and here's the guy, the right price, right product, everything was okay. But when he walked out, the guy said, you did not want to be there because she banged the table and she says, I don't want anybody working with him or that company ever again. And again, should we be doing stuff like that? Probably you should go for the best deal. But what happens is it gets in the way, and we got to watch out that we don't get into that problem. So we've got to take a look at that aspect of it. Now, by the way, to emphasize this 15 to 85% a little more and working with the office, just one other thing that goes along with this a little bit is I always like this quote from Agilent Technologies. I don't know if anybody heard of them, but I did some work for them a while ago. And I always like this one, so you might want to think about this. He said, 50% to all our obstacles success centered around team dynamics. Culture eats strategy for breakfast. And think about that for a moment. If people don't get along, they don't work together as well, or this, I don't care what plans you have, I don't care what strategies you have, guess what happens? Nothing's going to work because everybody sits down and we got our strategies, our plans. If I don't get along with you, you don't get along, you know what? It's going to happen. And how many times sometimes we avoid people or do this because of that aspect of it. So think about that. And if you follow some of these guidelines, because I'm going to give you a few more things today which you can do, if you follow these today, you'll get along like these guys did here, right here. So. If they can get along, then you guys can too. These are my past clients, by the way, because I only work with the animal crowd. No adults will ever hire me. Humans don't hire me, just animals. But anyway, so just you will get along with these guys. Now, to put this into perspective a little more, let's start at the beginning. And the thing is, there's a term here, because what is your rule book? And let me explain what I mean by that. One of the ways, if you want to build rapport, relationships, connect with customers and coworkers, you have to understand yourself a little bit and where you're seeing things. And what we got to realize that everybody that you're dealing with, whether it's customer, coworkers, sees the world through different lenses. We all have separate realities of how life should be. And a lot of times people get on our nerves because they don't what? They don't see the things the way we see it in that case. And we've got, and we can't take it what? Personally in those areas to make it work. It's sort of like Republicans and Democrats. You know, you see this thing where people say, you know how you see an issue and some people say, I can't see how you can see it that way. I can't see how you can, and it's the same issue, but it's because of people's what? Realities and lenses and how they were raised and all that stuff. And I want to read something to you because this will cut your stress down quite a bit and help you in these areas. And it's from this great book, by the way, just a little plug, but it's called Check Out Your Rule Book. And I just want you to think about this, because if you actually go along with stuff, your stress level will go way down too, and you will actually get along better with other people. But it goes like this. We each have an invisible edition of our personal rule book deeply ingrained in our brains. These guidelines define our expectations and desires, how others should treat us, what we believe is right, fair, and just, and how the world and its people should behave. We judge people by our book. We have rules about being courteous, extending appreciation, acknowledging work, honoring time, demonstrating concern, being compassionate, delivering service, and the degree of effort required for projects. We have rules about how fast people should return phone calls and emails, reply to requests, respond with answers, handle problems, pitch in on projects, and most importantly, what people generally should do and what they shouldn't. The rules all serve as our indivisible code of conduct with expectations of reciprocal exchange or else. So if people don't follow the way we do it, we got to watch from that other aspect of it. And by the way, another thing that you might want to remember today too is don't take it what? Personally. Yeah, if you can remember that, you're going to be a lot better off in the long run. And to help you not take it personally, what I'd like to give here is, and to keep the stress at, and I don't mean to psychoanalyze anybody in this room, but a lot of the ways people are, the people you have to deal with as customers or coworkers, is based, a lot of that is based on how they grew up when they were kids, when they were like 5 years old and 6 years old and 7 years old. So I look at everybody as little children. I look at everybody as little children, so I don't get upset at anybody. And to help you get along with this, some of you may have heard this, but this was, how many of you have ever seen this on the internet, Kids' Views on Marriage? Has anybody seen that, Kids' Views on Marriage? Let me just read this to you, because these are the people you're dealing with now, and these were their thoughts when they were young, and this is how you got to deal with them. First question they asked, this was a kid, Alan, he's age 10, he says, how do you decide who to marry? And guess what he said? He said, you have to find somebody who likes the same stuff. Like if you like sports, she should like it that you like sports, and she should keep the chips and dip coming. So and by the way, if you want this guy's name so your daughter doesn't go out with him. Here was another one. How do you decide who to marry? And this is from Kristen, who's age 10. You know what she said? No person really decides before they grow up who they're going to marry. God decides it all the way before, and then you get to find out later who you're stuck with. You know? Anybody felt like that, by the way? Okay. What is the right age to get married? And this is from Freddie, who's age 6. No age is good to get married at. You've got to be a fool to get married. So, I wonder where he's coming from. How can a stranger tell if two people are married? And here's Eddie, age 6. Married people usually look happy to talk to other people. What do you think your mom and dad have in common? This is Lori, age 8. Both don't want any more kids. And then what do most people do on a date? And it's interesting because it says, and this is from Martin, age 10. This is interesting. He said, on the first date, they just tell each other lies. And that usually gets them interested to go out on a second date. And then I'll just give you one more, but it says, when is it okay to kiss someone? Has anybody ever wondered when that is? When do you want to really, and this woman, at 7 years old, she's pretty savvy. Listen to this. When is it okay to kiss someone? And she says, when they're rich. You know. Hey, look at that. Then you don't have to come to these sessions. You can do what you want, you know, play golf all day. So sometimes, you know, it makes a lot of sense on those types of things. So it just keeps going on and on. But the key here is to remember, you know, don't take it personally. What is your rule book? Remember, people have separate realities. And again, realize that you can't change them. The only person you really can change is yourself, and that's hard. But you know, if you're raised a certain way, a lot of that's going to be the way you are in that area. And I always like this quote by Wolf Ranke, who said, "We need to accept people the way they are, not the way we think they should be." And ask yourself this one right here: am I using myself as the gold standard? Everything I think is right, and then we get into problems on that stuff. So think about that a little bit as you're moving along. By the way, if you think you're always right too, let me just give you a quick little exercise here. Could everybody just close your eyes real quickly? Everybody close your eyes real quickly. Keep your eyes closed. And what I'd like you to do with your eyes closed is to point your right hand in, point which way you think is north with your finger. Keep your eyes closed. Keep your eyes closed. Everybody point north. Okay, still keeping your eyes closed. Keep your pointing north. With your other hand, how many of you think you're right? Okay, now keep your hands up and everybody look at everybody else. Okay, we've got people going like 18 different directions here. Okay, that's good. I had some people going up like this. Is that north? Okay. But the point is you know how we think we're so right, and everybody's got, well, which way? And I have no clue which is north anyway. So I don't know which really is north, but something to take a look at. Okay, once we got our rule book and we understand others and how people, a big part of that is how people perceive you. And a lot about how people perceive you is by your tone of voice, your body language, and how you come across. And there's a statistic that some of you have probably seen before. If you've ever gone to any seminar in your life, you've seen this one. How many of you have seen it? It's how you say it, not just what you say. But there's a statistic that says that only 7% of the message that people perceive are by what? The words you use. 38% is by your tone of voice, and 55% is by your body language. So what they're saying is a large part of the way people perceive you is your what? Your body language and tone of voice. And if you don't believe me, let's say I came here today and I went like this and I said, I'm real happy to be here. You know, I'm saying the words right, but what are you picking up? No, he ain't. You know, and so sometimes you can say the message, but it goes off in the wrong dimension. So to be more approachable, likable, and trustworthy, to come across, I want to give you a little acronym that you can use to soften your image, to make yourself more likable, approachable, and trustworthy. And by the way, I do have a handout for you on this one later if you want it, but if you want to take notes, I'm a note taker anyway. So, but the first thing, to make yourself more approachable, likable, and trustworthy, the S would be what? Smile. Okay. And when I say smile, let me just say something about smile here really quickly. If you do not normally smile, don't start doing it all of a sudden. Okay? You come to work, why is Gil smiling all of a sudden? Am I going to lose my job or what? You know, he's got something on me. So, you know, if you don't normally do it, don't start doing it all of a sudden. Also, when we talk about smile, you know, it's interesting too when you're on the phone. A lot of you are on the phone a lot of times, and you know how the smile can what? Come through on the phone. And a long time ago, I was working with one client, and we had like 47% less complaints next year because we did one thing. These were telephone operators, and we did one thing with these operators. We put a little, does anybody ever do this? We put a mirror next to their desk, and when they got on the phone, they had to do this. They were required. We had ring, 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 and they'd had to look in the mirror. Good morning, how are you? And everybody thought, oh, they're so nice and so pleasant. I don't think I solved their real problems, but anyway, we got them, the customer thought they were pleasant and nice and all that, so that's another thing. But smile, and by the way, only smile also when appropriate. You know, I was with, you know what I'm talking about there? You ever see the newscasters sometimes and they say, well, there were 5 deaths in Fallujah, and they have that little smirk on their face. Or I heard a group the other day, the guy was giving a very serious speech. I was helping him with his presentation, but he got up there and he says, okay, we're having layoffs around here. And he had that little smirk, and I said, that is not really appropriate. So watch how you do that. Next thing to make yourself more approachable, likable, and trustworthy is the O. And the O would be what? Take a guess. Open. Somebody got it? There you go. That's not too hard. And open means this. How many of you do this as a habit? If he's raising it like this, it's not that bad, you know. But how many do that? And this innocently could just mean I'm cold, right? Or it can innocently mean I'm comfortable this way. But unfortunately, what do we say? People, perception is reality. And by the way, when I say perception is reality, perception is really not reality. It's somebody else's reality. But a lot of people perceive this as what? Closed, arrogance, I think I'm better than you, or you ever get in a discussion, for some of you who are instructors in here, one of the students says something you disagree with, and we just sort of get like this, and then it's going downhill from there. So you gotta watch out for that point. The next thing to make yourself more approachable, likable, and trustworthy is the F, and the F is friendly is excellent, but I'm going to put it over here because it's wrong. Sorry. It's still good. I'm giving you credit no matter what you say to me right now. Facial, you know what? That's close enough. I'm going to call it focus or forward lean. And when I say focus or forward lean, by the way, I don't mean like this when you're talking to people, leaning over. But it is sort of facing people when you're talking to you. How many of you ever had somebody turn their back on you when they're talking to you, or not pay attention to you? It's really disconcerting sometimes on that. You got to watch out for that aspect of it. But focus means this. How many of you ever, when you're talking to somebody, you ever been to a party, for example, and everybody's looking around, everybody but you? You know what I'm talking about? Or you're at a meeting and they're just looking all around. It's sort of like a party where maybe there's somebody better looking over there. I don't know. You know, they're considering this kind of stuff. But focus is paying attention to the person that you're talking to. T is what? Pardon? Tone is excellent, but that's there. Sorry. Still good. It's very good. Tone was 38%. It's very good to be trustworthy. Trust. It's good to have some time to do this. Anybody else?
Tone of voice.
Pardon?
Tone of voice.
Tone of voice. Well, we got tone.
Oh, okay.
You know what? I'm going to give this to you because it's sort of tricky, but it's territory. And territory means getting into somebody's space. So, for example, and your name is? Melissa. For example, I'm getting real close to Melissa right here. She's kicking me, by the way. So don't take this seriously. And in American culture, the ideal distance to be away from somebody is what? Somebody say 30 feet? Bob, did you tell me this advanced group here? I got to take this down a level. 2 feet? Somebody said 2. It's about 14 inches to 4 feet is the ideal distance to be for somebody. For example, how many of you know anybody like this? And if you're doing this, you got to take a look at yourself. How many of you know anybody like this is when you're talking to them, they're right in your face, and you step back, and they don't get it. They just keep coming. And they keep coming. And they don't. And all you picked up is what? Bad breath. You just want to get out of there, and all that stuff. And that can be very disconcerting to people too, to have somebody right in you. So if you're one of these people doing it, take a good look at yourself and say, cut that out, because it really takes away from building the connections and the rapport on that. So 14 inches to 4 feet is the ideal distance that you need to stand there. The next one is the E. Make yourself more approachable, likable, and trustworthy, because what do we say? People are making up their minds about you instantly. The E is what? Oh, yeah, boy, that's good. Eye contact. And eye contact, by the way, eye contact does not mean staring at anyone. There is a fine line between staring and stalking, and you got to watch out for that, because you ever seen somebody just stare at you? You ever do this? Or for some of you who are trainers, and a lot of you are trainers in here, for example. You ever had a class where there's somebody just always looking at you? Anybody know what I'm talking about? And they're just looking at you the whole time, and you know how you want to look at all sides of the room. So I'm like looking over here, but there's always this person staring at me. So you go, now let me tell you about the 4 things. and it's just because you wonder, is your zipper down or what? You know, the whole thing is like, I don't know why they're looking at me like that. But anyway. But eye contact, and the ideal time to keep your eyes on anyone is what? In American culture. When you're speaking? When they're speaking? Time-wise, though. It's about that, because once you go beyond this time a little bit, sometimes people feel uncomfortable. It's about, yeah, somebody said about 3 to 5 seconds is the ideal time. But don't start doing this. Don't start going like, okay, I got to look at you again, or don't start getting off and on these areas, but be very careful on that. And again, you want to focus on them. Don't, as again, 3 to 5 seconds the ideal, but obviously you can go over a little bit, but watch out as you're going along with that too. Let me ask you this too. When we talk about eye contact, how do you tell if somebody likes you or agrees with you by their eyes? Somebody said it. What did you say? Yeah, the pupils tend to expand or dilate. So let's say I'm talking to Gil here. Oh, he doesn't like anything I'm saying. God, you guys don't like any of this stuff. I got to go to somebody who likes it. But anyway, but the pupils tend to expand, or they tend to dilate. And it was interesting. I was doing a workshop for a group called Pfizer Pharmaceuticals with a bunch of doctors the other day. And one guy raised his hand. He says, you know, Arnold, that's not necessarily true. And I said, he says, that's not true all the time. I said, what do you mean? He says, well, that means people could also be on drugs. So, because if you're on drugs, your eyes get wider too. So either you guys are on drugs, or I don't know, but you got to watch out for that, so that aspect of it. How do you tell also, a lot of this too is we need to get instant eye contact when we meet people. What's a trick that you can use to actually get, let's say you're meeting somebody intimidating or you're a little bit shy. How do you get instant eye contact with somebody if you're in those categories when you walk in the room? What's a trick you can use?
Handshake.
Pardon?
Handshake.
Handshake? Okay, if that works for you, it works. There's no wrong answers on this one. Handshake, how do you get that? Pardon? Ask him a question could be something that would work in that area.
Say hello.
Say hello, that could work too. Okay, here's one thing you may want to try on this area too, is let's say, you know, I'm a little shy and, I'm sorry, and your name is? Tracy. And let's say I'm meeting Tracy and she's really intimidating or something, and so I come up and I say, what I would do is, if let's say I'm a little shy or I just need to, because if you don't make that eye contact, what happens? People don't trust you, they don't build rapport, there's no connection there. It takes away from what you want to get across. So I would pretend, if she's really intimidating, that I'm not looking at a person, I'm looking at the color of her eyes. So what I'll do is I'll say, hi, I'm Arnold Sano, but I'll play a game with myself. What is the color of her eyes? And that generally takes about 3 to 5 seconds. I have no clue what yours are, so this might take an hour. Looking at there goes the staring. But anyway, it could take a long time. But the thing is, that seems to work. And to give you an example of this too, because a while ago, is anybody here familiar with the Washingtonian magazine? How many of you ever heard of Washingtonian magazine? And a number of years ago, they rate the best doctors, best dentists, best this, and there was a doctor in there. And he was rated as one of the best doctors in all of Washington, D.C. And what I did is, he said, come in, he says, I'm getting no referrals from other patients. This is what he said, I'm rated as the best doctor. He said this on the phone. I get no referrals from other patients. My staff has a high turnover rate. Nobody seems to like me. And can you come in and figure out what to do? Now, this didn't take a genius to figure this out, because this is how I did. I walked in. I'm coming in from where you are. This is the doctor. He's standing like this. And he starts talking to me like this. And he says, I don't know what it is. I'm the best doctor in all Washington, D.C. I get no referrals from other doctors. My patients don't seem to like me. They come just because I'm a good doctor. And I have a high turnover of staff. And then he points at me like this and says, and can you figure out what to do about it? Now, this didn't take a genius. And I hate to tell you what I thought about next, because being the consultant I am, my first reaction is like, geez, how can I make this a 3-year consulting assignment? Let's say 3 years on eye contact. Okay, let's say 3 years. How can I stretch this one out? But anyway, but all I did with him was to do what? I had him do the color of the eyes thing, because he just had this aversion to doing that. And I work with a lot of people with social anxieties, which is a nice word for shyness, and that worked really well. And within a couple days, he had it. So it's interesting, but it took away from his connections with people because he didn't do that aspect of it. And then the last one there is the N, to make yourself more approachable, likable, and trustworthy. The N is? Nice. Oh, nice is really good to have. Natural. Natural. I don't want to have a picture of that, but natural. Oh, somebody said it. Nod, yeah. Not nodding off now. Not nodding off. And what I mean by that is nodding to show you're paying attention to people. And when I say nodding off, unfortunately, a lot of us do what? We're tired all the time, we're yawning. And yawning doesn't necessarily mean you're bored or stuff, but it gives the impression that you are, which people pick up really quickly, and then they have a reaction for you. Now, by the way, when I talk about nodding, let me hear, there's also on the phone, because when you're on the phone, you don't have your body language, right? You just have your tone of voice and your words. So let me hear everybody in this room how you nod on the phone. Let me hear your nods on the phone. Okay, I'm not convinced here, but you got to watch out how you do that, because that's the only impression people are getting for you. And to give you an example of this too, my wife, I don't know if you know anybody like this, but my wife is very busy all the time. And when I call her on the phone, she'll go like this. She'll go, she'll say, Arnold, how are things going? And as soon as I start talking, guess what she'll do? She'll go, which literally means, look, I got better things to do than talk with you. So I know at least where I stand. And I've heard this every time. I'll call her today, she'll do the same thing. But I wanted to test her one time. I was flying back from San Diego, and my wife called, and she says, how are things going again? And I started talking, and she went, uh-huh. And you know what I did in the middle of her uh-huhs? I said, you know what, Nancy? I am leaving with another woman. Guess what she said? She said, And I said, you know what? I'm leaving tonight at 9 o'clock. She went, And then she said, see ya. I said, God, she did not hear one word I said. And then I found out later that women actually listen better than I thought. Because I came home the next day, I put my key in the door, and she says, well, what are you doing at home? I thought you left with another woman. So, you know, you learn real quickly not to take those chances as you're going. So you really got to watch out on those aspects of it. But the reason I'm giving you this, the so what, because to me the whole thing of this is, so why am I even going over this? Because if you don't practice these types of things, people will focus on you and not the message that you want to get across. I'm always going to be listening to you or dealing with this. Plus, if you don't do this, they're not going to feel as comfortable with you. You're not going to build the rapport and the connections without this aspect of it. So you've got to work on those areas too. By the way, one other thing too. Remember, words were a certain small part of this, but words also do count. And what's the 3 words you should really watch out for all the time? 3 words, 3 key things you should stay away from in any of your talks, unless you really know the people well. Pardon? Be honest? Oh yeah, that's a bad word. By the way, what was the #1 word in the USA Today the other day that they said 47% of Americans dislike this word? Nobody knows that one? Yeah, there you go. Yeah, whatever. You know, somebody says whatever, which is really a dismissive statement to people. It's sort of putting you down, so you got to watch out for that. Other things, when I say about body language and words too, this does vary by culture. And I just want to give you one example of this. Does anybody remember in 1992 when George Bush #1 was in Australia? Anybody remember that? And if you know what this is, don't give it away, because this was on national news. But this is George Bush #1. He's in Australia, and he's in a motorcade. You're the Australians. And you're going, yay! They're all excited that he's there. And he starts doing this in his motorcade. You guys are cheering. And he starts doing this to the crowd, going back and forth. If you know what it is, don't give it away. And he starts going this. And in American culture, this means what? Peace or victory. However, in Australia, this is an obscenity. So George Bush is smiling. He's giving this obscenity to Australians. Guess what the Australians start doing? They say, yeah, you. And they give it back to him. And you know what he says? He says, oh, they love me. And he does it even more. And then the front page of the Australian Times next day said, Bush insults nation. And there was a whole hoopla on this. And you know, it's funny, but guess what? 3 people actually lost their jobs because they were working from what? American culture instead of like the other culture. And if you deal with other cultures, I always read this book when I go overseas called Do's and Taboos of International Travel. I don't know if anybody's seen that one, but I make sure I don't screw up on some of these things because it can really get you in trouble. So think about that. Also, one other thing too, so smile, open, forward, nod. Another thing I just wanted to mention too real quickly is when we talk about words, you know, how to say no in a nice way is an important thing to do. And anybody ever wanted to say no, but you're afraid of how it's going to come across sometimes, and you do this, and you really got to watch it because you got to be a little more diplomatic. And what this is let's say Gil's interrupting me at work, and I can do a couple things. I can say, Gil, you know, I'm busy right now. I could give him that look. I could do all sorts of things. But what does that do? That chips away at our connections and our relationships. So we can do that, but it's chipping away here and there. So instead of that, I might say, Gil, you know, I understand this is important to you. However, here's the situation. I've got this report that's due out at 4:15 today, and why don't we do this? Why don't you see me tomorrow, or why don't you get lost and see Bob? No, I wouldn't say that, but you'd go along the ways. And so it's something that I just wanted to give you really quickly as a little technique that you can use to actually say no in a nice way. Okay, moving on from there, with body language, I want to talk a little bit about another problem that gets us when we talk about connections and rapport is misunderstandings. And misunderstandings cause people to become irate, lose respect, lose trust, lose cooperation, derail relationships. Has anybody here ever been misunderstood? Just a couple of you? Okay, we'll move on. So I think we'll do, but we need to look at that. And when I talk about misunderstandings, you know, the reason this is a problem is there's about 600 words in the English language with about 10 different meanings out there. And how many of you have ever been in a situation where somebody says, I told you this. No, you didn't. Yes, you did. No, you didn't. Yes, you did. You go back and forth, and you swear you told them, but they didn't get it. And so what I want to do before I move on any further is could everybody please take one of the pieces of paper I gave you, and I'd like you to number from 1 to 12 on that piece of paper. So if you can just go down like this, and I'd like you to number from 1 to 12. 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Everybody got 1 to 12? Okay, then put your pens down. As soon as you got that, put your pens down. Okay, what I'd like you to do now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to read to you a list of 12 words. And when I finish, I want you to write them down in the order that I said or as close as you can get. Write them down in the order that I said or as close as you can get. So if anybody needs a pen, anybody else need a pen, by the way? Okay, oh boy, we got, okay. Anybody else? I don't know if I have anybody have any extra pens or pen there, let's see. Got to see which hotel I went to recently to give you the pen, but you know what? Oh, here you go. Somebody else, I'll give that back there. Okay. Well, let me do this. So here it is. I don't have any more at this point. Okay, I'm going to read these words, and when I finish, I want you to write them down in the order I said or as close as you can get. So everybody just put your pens down right now. Everybody's pens are down. Okay, here's the words. Night, rest, quiet, slumber, deep, NyQuil, snooze, restful, snore, sound, tranquil, and awake. So write those down in the order I said or as close as you can get. Take a second here. Everybody got them? Okay, let me ask you a few questions, because we're talking about avoiding misunderstandings today. What was the first word on your list? Night. Night. And how many of you got that? Okay, almost everybody got that. So what's the point behind that? When you say something, what? Yeah, first words people remember. So a lot of times when you want to get your message across, so you don't want to be misunderstood, what do you want to do? You want to get what you want across right away. You know how many times we go off on the tangents, and that's when people are really listening. So we want to get the message across first of what we're trying to get. We want to get their attention and give them what we're talking about. Okay, let me ask you another question. How many of you had NyQuil on the list? NyQuil. Okay, about 90% of you had that. And that's usually in the middle of a conversation. How do we get that? Because that's like, a lot of people, how many of you, again, listen on the phone, you hear what somebody says, and then you tune out. Anybody ever done that? You tune in, you tune out, you tune in, you tune out. And a lot of times people don't get the middle of the stuff. Why do we get that? I'm sorry?
Sleep, tranquil, wake.
Mm-hmm.
It's just kind of...
It was in there. It reminded you.
Product name. Yeah, product name, whatever they go.
Product, it's a brand. Yeah. Well, here's the point behind this, is about 60% of the American public is very visual. So you need to create pictures in their minds if you want them to understand something. For example, how many of you ever seen PowerPoint slides that have 1 million words on them and then you just tune out? Has anybody ever done that? Or people are talking very intellectually a lot of times and you need to have all the other examples and stories and anecdotes in there to have it. So create a picture in their mind. Let me ask you another one. How many of you had awake on the list? Okay, about 95% of you had that. And what's the point behind that one? Yeah, people remember the last thing you say. So as soon as you finish something, talking to somebody, say, I just want to reemphasize, here's the points I want to talk about. Here's what I've talked about. Here's how I want to summarize. Let them know, because that's when you got maximum listening. For example, how many of you ever gone to a seminar and somebody says, now, in conclusion, and as soon as they say that, everybody wakes up. So it's like, and then that's when you get them to listen again. So you got them for that last section. So you got to remember that. Okay, let me ask you this. Raise your hands up high if you had this one. How many have sleep on your list? Raise your hand up high if you had sleep. Keep your hands up high if you had sleep. Okay, about 20% had sleep. I did not say the word sleep. I did not say it. But, yeah, but a lot of you got it. I did not say that. So what's the point behind that? We're asleep, maybe, but besides that, we hear what we think we hear and expected to hear. And it goes back to what Gil was saying right there. It's like, how many of you ever come to a situation where somebody says, I told you that. No, you didn't. Yes, you did. No, you didn't. Because they're what? Their minds are moving so fast and they're picking up all these areas on that aspect of it. So that's why we got to keep reiterating and going back and saying, this is what I said, and rephrasing the information you had on that aspect of it. And the key is we really want people to walk away with the message that we said and not something else in there. Now, to put this into perspective a little bit too, we get misunderstandings in email and in other things that we do. And just to give you this, some of you may have seen these, but how many of you have ever seen these church bulletin bloopers on the internet? Anybody have seen that before? couple of you. Just listen to these. These are actual clippings from church newspapers, and you tell me what these actually mean. First one said, Bertha Belch, a missionary from Africa, will be speaking tonight at the Calvary Memorial Church in Racine. Come tonight and hear Bertha Belch all the way from Africa. Now what does that mean? The peacemaking meeting scheduled for today has been canceled due to a conflict. You know. At the evening service tonight, the sermon topic will be, what is hell? Come early and listen to our choir practice. Or here's another one. It said, the low self-esteem support group will meet Thursday. Please use the back door. That's really telling them, isn't it? Yeah, we don't want to even see you, so you got that. And then to put this into perspective a little bit too, I have some pictures of some signs where these could have different meanings on this. And actually Gil helped me put these, spice them up a little bit here. But the first one on there is when we talk about some of these signs, I just want to mention this. This is coming into Washington, D.C. Anybody live in Lake Ridge or Woodbridge? This was for 2 years in a row. This was coming up, the sign coming up into Washington, D.C. And we transposed a little bit. But this is what it said. I couldn't believe this. For 2 years it's up. It says, welcome to Washington, D.C., a work-free drug place. Now, what does that mean? You work free and get drugs? I don't know. I mean, that could be part of it. It could be. But what did they screw up there? A drug-free. Yeah, how many times, you got to watch it. Would you send an email out to somebody and they hate you forever and you wonder it's just because you, transposed one word. Another one on this one is like, this was for, I want to make this one, is for a car dealer. I read this actually in an ad in, where was this, in Houston for a car dealer. And it said this, it said, why go anywhere and get cheated when you can come here? I offered this when I was working with Chrysler, say, look, you can have this if you want, but they didn't take it on me, so they didn't want to use that for their motto. A couple others like, what does that mean? Look at that one. I'm taking a guess on that. Or the next one was, don't let worries kill you, let the church help. Soccer not allowed. Soccer may only be played in the Archer range. That's a good way to get rid of your kids. And then the next one is interesting because I've done a lot of speeches in Las Vegas, and I work with different companies and stuff. And when you're in Las Vegas, they play dice. What's the name for dice, by the way? Craps. They call it dice craps. And I was in Las Vegas, and it was sort of cool because I was at the Hilton in Las Vegas, and it was sort of neat because they put my name on the sign, said "Welcome Arnold Sano." So I thought this was pretty neat. But then I didn't pay attention to the whole sign a little bit, and this was what the sign actually said. Just read over there: Ski Industries about Welcome Arnold Sano. Look what they put on the bottom: Craps all night. And that could have a couple different meanings, right? So you don't know where that's. Where that is coming from. So it could have a whole bunch of things, and you got to watch out. So anyway, moving on from there, but what do we say about avoiding misunderstandings is we want to go back and rephrase the message and say, look, I want to make sure I got this across properly, and take the time to do that because there's so many things that people get in trouble because of it otherwise around. Now, just a couple more things on building rapport, relationships, and connections. The next thing, I'm just going to go over this relatively quickly. But this is a big problem I see in a lot of groups I work with is people say, oh, they're rude and this type of thing. And let me just say something about rudeness. Rudeness, I don't think, is intentional. People don't mean to be rude, but they inadvertently do things that have consequences for others. And it was interesting when we looked at the statistics, this was done by the University of North Carolina, of how it hurts the bottom line. It said 53% of people lost work time worrying about incidents. 22% decreased their effort at work, 10% cut back on hours, 50% considered quitting or changing jobs, and 12% actually did quit because of rudeness in those areas. So we really got to take a look at that. And when I talk about rudeness too, let me just say this again. It's people don't mean to do that, but they don't understand what they're doing. For example, anybody ever seen that show 24? Anybody know I'm talking about 24? And it was the other day. We were just sitting there, and it was like the climax, and they're ready to kill the guy. And all of a sudden, I'm sitting behind my wife here, and she didn't mean to do this, but she got all excited because the big climax was happening. She says, "Did you see that?" And she stands up blocking my way, and I can't see the whole thing. And it's not that she's trying to be rude, but you know what? We're not observant of the things that we're doing out there. So let me give you the top 10 acts of rudeness. This was done by a professor in New York, and I put it in the Get Along book too, by the way. So, and I think you have some copies here. But and you don't have to write this down unless you're doing any of these. How about that? Somebody's writing them all down, but because this is everybody's ready to write. Okay. Yeah. But if you're doing any of these, because what did we say before? You can, if there's one thing you're doing, just write that down. Don't write them all because it'll confuse you. So here's the top 10 acts. It's not in any order. First one was talking about someone behind his or her back. And the problem is once you start doing that, the other person who you talk to thinks what? You're going to talk about them then after that. So you got to watch out for that aspect. Interrupting others when they are speaking or working. And by the way, when you interrupt people, sensitivity, rapport, commitment are all killed. How many of you know anybody who's like talks really slowly? Anybody know like that? You're just dying to put words in there. You just like put the words in there, and it's like they never get to say anything. The other thing is flaunting status or authority, acting in a condescending manner would be another one that goes with that. Belittling someone's opinion to others, and I can get you a list of this later on that. Failing to return phone calls or emails. We talked about that a little while ago, and that was a big one. Giving others a silent treatment. Anybody been in a situation like that where they just sort of ignore you sometimes in a case? Like my wife a lot of times. No, but you go there. Insults, yelling, and shouting. Just again, that's obvious verbal forms of sexual harassment. I'm not, as I said, not going over these into much detail. What does that last one mean, by the way? Intentionally damning with faint praise. Anyone want to take a shot at that? Intentionally damning with faint praise. What it means, it's sort of a backhanded compliment. Like, Gil, you did really good on that, but you know what? If you'd done this, this, and this, that would have been a lot better. It's like my son came home one time when he was in 6th grade, and he'd gotten all A's and B's and 1 C. Guess what my wife focused on? She says, what's that C about? I mean, I'm just happy he's graduating elementary school. So I have a whole different attitude on this thing. So, but it's giving that compliment and working in those areas. So top 10 acts, and I can get you this list later if you like it. But the key is don't take it personally when somebody is like that too. That's because, again, I don't think a lot of people mean it. They just get into that situation. Okay, moving on, and I'm going to skip by this real quickly because I want to do something later. But the key here is how do we get everybody to like us, to trust us, to sing our praises, and work with us in those areas. And to do that, there's 6 things that you need to do on a regular basis. And I just want to leave you with these today. The first one there is attitude. And I don't mean to be fluffy about this, but everything really does begin and end with attitude when you really boil it down to it. I don't know if you knew this, but Hyatt Hotels a number of years ago when they were looking for people to hire, as far as attitude went, if you did not, listen to this, if you did not smile at least 5 times in a 5-minute interview, guess what happens to your odds of getting a job at a Hyatt? You would not get a job no matter what position, because, and I had a group the other day, somebody says, well, that's unfair, they should tell you to smile. I said, okay, that was the advanced group. But anyway, you've got to take a look at this. Disney World, anybody know this? Disney World, they actually have somebody who's a minder who goes around, and when they see somebody in a bad attitude, not anybody, but if they see one of their employees in a bad attitude, what do? They take them off for the day, because what do we say about body language and tone? It does come out to those people. Do you guys have somebody looking around here at your attitudes, or nobody be working today, or no, stuff like that? So anyway, just wanted to check. And to put attitude in perspective, some of you may have heard this story before, but it's sort of the only way I could relate this. Is everybody here familiar, if you've heard it, let me explain again, but is everybody here familiar with monasteries? Anybody seen movies about that where men go and they can't talk and it's very quiet in those monasteries? Well, there was this young man who'd gone to a monastery and he'd been there for 2 years. He said absolutely nothing for those 2 years. But after 2 years of staying there, you get to say 2 words. And so the chief monk comes to him after 2 years and says, you can say 2 words. And he says, his 2 words are bed lumpy. That's it. That's all he says after 2 years. So now he's in this monastery for 4 years. It's his anniversary again. He gets to say 2 more words. And the chief monk comes up to him and says, you can say 2 more words. And he says, food terrible. That's it after 4 years. So now he's in this monastery for 6 full years. And all he said is food terrible and bed lumpy. And the chief monk says, it's 6 years now. You can say 2 more words. And after 6 years, he says, I quit. And the chief monk goes, well, it doesn't surprise me one bit. All you've done since you've been here is complain and complain and complain. And the moral of this story is, how many of you, just by a show of hands, how many of you see the good side of anything no matter what? 1, 2. No matter what goes wrong, there's always a good side to it. Pretty much on that? Okay, let me give you a test here a little bit, because there's an exercise. I did this a long time ago. I did some work for National Dulles Airport in Washington, D.C. Well, we're all in Washington, D.C., but National Dulles. And we had like 37% less complaints next year because we did an attitude exercise where we called it the flip side exercise. And everybody had to take a little black book. And when something went wrong, they say there's a flip side to it. because this is easier said than done. I can't just sit here and say have a good attitude. It's not going to work. But what they did is they put down. So for example, if you hated your job, what's the flip side of hating your job? I got a job. I mean, that's pretty good these days, right? So you should have no complaints on anything. Let's say you put a dent in your new car. What's the flip side of that? Nobody was hurt. Okay, good attitude there. You know, it's about time I get a dent in there. So here's another one. Let's say you lost a sale. Let's say you're in sales and you lost a sale. What's the flip side of that? Get the next one. And what's that old thing Tom Hopkins used to say? You got to go through 7 of these to get one. So, well, that means I just have to go for 4. You know, you look at the bright side of everything. Here's one that might get you upset. Let's say your husband or your wife or your boyfriend or your girlfriend, they just sort of took off on you. That could be pretty devastating. What's the flip side of that? Get a new one. They're gone, thank God. Chris says that is the flip side. What's the problem here? They're gone, thank goodness. More closet space. I don't know. Everybody's coming up with certain things. But you know, it's funny. You can make fun of all this stuff too. But the thing is interesting is that, and everybody remember Christopher Reeves, Superman? I was in a seminar with him once, and he was speaking at lunchtime, and he did this. He was sitting up there, and if you're aware of him, he was what was it called? He was paralyzed, and he couldn't move, but they moved him around like this. And he's talking about attitude, and he says, you know what? And he just moved his head. He says, I would change places with any one of you for any of your so-called problems. Does anyone want to take me up on it? And you know what? You couldn't hear a pin drop. And so, you know how some things just hit you right there that, you know, what are my problems? You know, and you need to take a look at that aspect of it. And one thing I would recommend on this flip side thing too, and you may want to think about this a little bit too, is if you're ever feeling like you're upset or things are going wrong your way, ask yourself this question. I don't know if any of you do this, but what am I grateful for at this moment? Does anyone ever do that? What am I grateful for at this moment? Because guess what? How can anything be wrong? Yeah, I can walk, I can talk. You know, so what? I didn't get this job, or I didn't get this, or I didn't get that. You know, I'm alive, basically. So ask yourself that question sometimes as you're moving along. Okay, so first thing to make is you got to have a great attitude and be in good shape, and there's a couple ways to do it. Second thing is to be reliable. What does reliable mean here? Do what you say you're going to do it on time, do it when you say you're going to do it, not be vague. I know you guys can't guarantee anything, but I got to give you this example. I was doing something for a garbage company in Hawaii one time, and they had this on the side of their truck. It said, I had to write this down, we guarantee complete satisfaction or double your garbage back. So show that to your members. I don't know, I just remember that one. Third thing was be responsive. And responsive, just to speed this up here a little bit, means being accessible, available, willing to help whenever there's a problem. Be credible. And what I mean by credible, do employees express trust and confidence? You know, you ever called somebody and they don't know? Have you ever gone to a computer store and you know more about it than they do? Or you went to buy something and you know more about it, or you've done research, so are you coming across as credible? Appearance, you know the old saying, don't judge a book by its cover, but what does everybody do? They do judge a book by its cover, and that could be everything that you're coming across. And it's interesting, I'm not an expert on dress, so I won't even say that. It's interesting too, and the reason I feel intimidated about that, I was once speaking for the Image Consultants of America. Anybody familiar with them? These are people that dress people up, and they're the tops in their field. There were about 300 people in the audience who were like top image things, and I started getting off onto dress, which is not a really good thing for me to do, because that's really not my area. And I said something about appearance, and then one woman raised her hand in the back, and she says, Arnold, I don't mean to be rude. By the way, when somebody says that, you know you're getting a zinger here. I don't mean to be rude, but she looked right at me from the back and she says, I could do wonders with your dress. And I said, what the heck? And you're looking for podiums again. And so I just talked from, now let me tell you some more here, and I didn't know what's going on. So that's why I will not lecture you on dress, because I got killed on that one. But be aware of that thing. And then the last thing is empathy. And empathy means to the extent that you can treat someone special and solve his or her unique needs, they'll continue to come back, they'll continue to work with you, and that's being special. It's like greeting people at the door when you're a trainer or speaker and getting the connections that we're talking about today. So to put that also in perspective too, I always like this statement by Joe Batten. It says, before you tell, ask, before you talk, listen, after you listen, write, always show that you care. And when you can translate you care, they will want to do business with you, and they don't let the details get in the way. And that happens, a lot of that is from what I've been talking about today, is by building the rapport, the relationship connections, by some of those things we were discussing today too. And before ending, one thing I also want you to recommend that you do is I always have like this, putting thoughts into action. I don't know if a lot of you do this, but I always like to do this before. Every time I finish, I sit through anybody's session, is I learned that I relearned, I discovered, I noticed, I was surprised, I'm disappointed that I plan, and what do I plan to do? Because it's nice sitting through these things, but if you don't do what? You don't do anything, you're not going to do it. And what's the old saying? You got to do what? Work on one thing at a time. And how many days in a row do you do something to make it a habit? 21 days. Yeah, if you do something for 21 days. For example, I used to interrupt people quite a bit. And for 21 days, guess what I did? I just didn't interrupt people. And guess what happened after 21 days? Well, I still interrupt them, but not as bad. So it doesn't work all the time. But anyway, so some of this is good in theory and practice. But by working on one thing at a time, and take a look at this, and as I said, I can get that. So to put this into perspective and to leave you today, because I know it's lunchtime, and what's the old saying? People don't mind if you start late, but they do kill you if you get into lunchtime. And Bob's giving me that look too. So I got it. So but to end on this, I find that the people who tend to be the best rapport builders, who tend to connect the best, tend to be nurturers. And I don't mean to be touchy-feely about that. But when I say nurturers, we all have a number of constituencies. We have our customers, we have our coworkers, we have our family, we have our friends. And by the way, family and friends are just as important too, because if things aren't going well there, guess what happens when you come into work? You start treating people badly, and we don't get along as well there. So we've got to work on all these things. And there's an old saying, everyone is like a plant in the garden, and if you don't water and feed them, they're not going to grow. And I always like this quote from Mahatma Gandhi, which I'll leave you with. It says this. He said, keep your thoughts positive because your thoughts become your words. Keep your words positive because your words become your actions. Keep your actions positive because your actions become your habits. Guard your habits and keep them positive because your habits become your values. Keep your values positive because your values become your destiny. And then he said that every day is a new beginning, and we must always remember that the nurtured seed always produces the abundant harvest. So I want to thank you again, and I hope you have an abundant harvest. And I'll turn it back to Bob. Thank you. Thanks. And I got out on time.